The tales of Gorgons and Medusas are epics that have been told and retold an ouroboros number of times across human history, which explains why there's quite a few cards in Yu-Gi-Oh's pool from a range of different archetypes and eras that reference these iconic creatures, all of which have their own unique ways of turning your opponent into stone. And in the Zexal era, we received Gorgonic, another archetype that attempted to actualize Medusa's stare. But while the mythical creatures require cunning, bravery, and weapons designed specifically to beat her, you won't need a moon mirror shield to take down this archetype. Which is why they're the subject of today's video, discussing why Gorgonic seems so cobbled together, the deck's potential grit, and what it would need to make some real concrete plays. Gorgonics are an archetype of dark rock monsters played by Abyss and used as a vector in his past life. The strategy is based around using your main deck Gorgonics to bring rank 3s to the field, but more specifically aims to summon its archetypal boss monster in Gorgonic Guardian, a surprisingly strong reward that can freeze your opponent's monsters in place with its first effect and then crumble them away with its second. As a result of how great Guardian is, every single card in the strategy is centered around either trying to bring it out or aiding its effects once you've managed to commit it to the field. Gargoyle and Ghoul can be solid enough tools for extension when paired with the right cards. Gorgonic Golem can protect your Guardian from back row, and a stare from Cerberus can convert even your non-Gorgonic rock-type monsters into the perfect materials for your boss monster. And once it's on the field, Guardian is genuinely a powerful threat that your opponent needs to be acutely aware of. While its stats certainly don't signal its status as a boss monster, its effects are almost absurd and allow you to control the game by using Guardian's negate to put a stop to your opponent's best plays, while also reducing the attack of their monsters to 0, which, even in the modern day, can be genuinely a devastating piece of interaction. And that's not all, as you can use this with the combination of Guardian's second effect, which can destroy any monster with 0 attack to apply even more pressure by removing your opponent's monsters from the field. This is actually pretty cute flavor-wise, as his gimmick is similar to the previously released Reptilian, an archetype of Medusa-like monsters that have an affinity for reducing your opponent's monsters to 0 attack, which allows them to trigger their best effects, ranging from excellent extenders to powerful payoffs. And so you'd hope the Gorgonic would continue this cold convention to allow for some similar strength or even a way to link the decks together. However, if you're brave enough to try gazing into Gorgonic's competitive viability, you'd only be left stone-faced. Make no mistake, Gorgonic Guardian is a brilliant monster, but actually getting there with your main deck Gorgonic monsters feels more constrictive than anything else. The biggest reason why is unfortunately obvious. The strategy lacks any kind of cohesion behind its limited number of monsters, which makes for an awkward hodgepodge of a deck that struggles to do much of anything at all, let alone actually summon its boss monster. Even when compared to the Reptilian, a deck that also leaves a lot to be desired, the archetypal tools available Gorgonic are from the Stone Age, and require you to jump through a lot of weird hoops solely to make a rank 3 monster. You can definitely get there with the right hands, but trying to do so solely with the archetypal tools strangely requires some very specific draws, most of which revolve around drawing into Gorgonic Gargoyle, the deck's only decent way of swarming the field, and your only other choice for extension being a monster that, egregiously, doesn't have the right level to overlay into your boss monster. Now, you would hope that a strategy whose monsters are dumber than a box of rocks would help the deck at least to have some solid back row to make it all worth it. Maybe some kind of counter trap to give you another great payoff, or a consistency spell that actually makes those awkward hands a little easier to find, or even just an archetypal monster reborn that can give you some pretty crazy extension. But no wild back row like this for Gorgonic exists. In fact, the deck actually has no back row at all, which is quite strange given the deck had some great spells when it was featured in the anime. Instead, the deck has to rely on generic rock support if it hopes to scrape by with a victory. Now, there's actually a bevy of great cards you can use to the deck's advantage, because even with the likes of Black Dragon Band, you can at the very least rely upon the Adamantipator cards to help you swarm the field. However, in doing so, you'll come to realize that you haven't really made a Gorgonic deck. You've made an Adamantipator deck that's worse than any other hybrid you can build due to the presence of the Gorgonic cards. Even your newfound access to Gorgonic Guardian just isn't worth trying to force a copy of Gorgonic Cerberus into your main deck, when you could instead be doing far better plays by playing literally vanilla monsters instead. The only realistic way of trying to splash Gorgonic into another strategy is by playing Guardian in a rock strategy that's already capable of making rank 3s, and completely forego almost every main deck Gorgonic card, with the Gargoyle being the only other potential diamond contained within this rough, as it can at least be an okay extender. But even this incohesive stone slab of a deck has a statue hidden within it that represents its core concept. An idea that showcases the potential of the deck, and if we chisel long enough, we might be able to allow for this Ozymandias of an archetype to actually work in some way, rather than needing to look upon it with despair. Let's start off with the strongest of the main deck monsters, Gorgonic Gargoyle. Gargoyle is a level 3 rock monster with a simple effect, but one that shouldn't be taken for granted, as when you normal summon any rock type monster, you can special summon it from your hand for free. Now, don't get it twisted, this effect isn't that amazing, and is utterly outclassed by almost any other rock extended you can think of, with the likes of Koiki Mirror Supplier and you have free search when you bring it out, Golem that guards the Millennium Treasures having lighter conditions, and the likes of Adamancipator Researcher can not only bring itself out from your hand for free, but can even let you special summon another rock type monster from your deck to let you go even further beyond. However, for what it's worth, you can absolutely find strength within Gargoyle's simplicity and ease of use, and in terms of pure Gorgonic strategies, Gargoyle's effect is the main reason that we can even call this strategy functional in the first place. It is without a doubt the best extender in the deck, requiring no cost and always netting you at least half of a Gorgonic Guardian, no matter what Gorgonic you choose to normal summon, making it a linchpin in the strategy, but is especially potent if you compare it with your level 3 Golem, Cerberus, or even a second copy of Gargoyle, so that you can virtually guarantee that Guardians is set up. Although the really cool part about Gargoyle is that its effect isn't limited to solely being usable with Gorgonic monsters. It can trigger as a free extender when you normal summon any rock type monster. This hasn't had too much utility in the TCG, but in Duel Links we've managed to see Gargoyle put on a solid display in rock focused strategies, with it occasionally appearing in Magnet Warrior decks as an extender, but appeared the most often with Giant Soldier of Stone strategies using the skill Centrification. As it just so happens that Giant Soldier of Stone and Sentry Soldier of Stone are level 3 rock monsters that you can use to easily access Gorgonic Guardian in even the most basic of hands. Although another really cute thing about how the simplicity of Gargoyle is that, unlike a lot of the modern extenders that usually come with some kind of lock to curb their potential use or abuse, Gorgonic Gargoyle is completely free. Now in most cases this doesn't matter too much, but there are absolutely underexplored instances in rock decks where just having a free extender that you don't need to use to summon Guardians specifically and can instead use for generic Xyz, Link, or even Synchro monster can be incidentally imperative, and can allow for Gargoyle to shine way more than you might think. In fact, there's one more way in which Gargoyle's simple effect can end up being an integral tool for a strategy, but only if you're playing it in the TCG, and that's because of the way our hand trigger effects work. You see, in the OCG and Master Duel, trigger effects that would activate in the hand work more like quick effects. So if you were to normal summon a Beta the Electromagnetic Warrior and attempt to use this effect to add a Magnet Warrior from your deck to your hand, then your opponent would have the opportunity to chain Ash Blossom to the activation before you get a chance to use Gorgonic Gargoyle. However, in the TCG, in-hand trigger effects are just that, trigger effects, and will have an opportunity to activate before your opponent's quick effects, which allows you to chain Gorgonic Gargoyle in response to your own beta, thereby preventing your opponent from being able to activate Ash Blossom in response by chain blocking it with your Gargoyle. Although currently there aren't too many rock monsters with integral effects and triggers on normal summon that Gargoyle can protect from. But if there were ever a deck within that vein, then Gargoyle, for all of its faults, could end up being an incredible inclusion. But in terms of its own archetype, you could have a couple of normal summons to pair the Gargoyle, and all of them are lacking in any kind of real bite, with Gorgonic Cerberus being a prime example. Cerberus has an on-normal summon effect, but it's not one that generates any kind of advantage, or would impede an opponent in any way, as all it does is allow you to convert the levels of all rock type monsters you control to level 3, and that's about it. Now at first glance, this effect seems okay, and that's not an incorrect assessment by any means. There are absolutely instances where Cerberus's level modulation is going to be exactly what you need in order to access Gorgonic Guardian or some other strong rank 3s. Doubly so in a strategy that may very well not have them as a focus, because like Gargoyle, one of the perks of this effect is that it works with any rock type monster, not just Gorgonics. For example, if you bit the bullet and tried making Adamancipator Gorgonic into the next meta threat, one thing that becomes apparent is that there are no level 3 Adamancipator monsters, So Cerberus is the way to connect the two archetypes together and is almost needed for the strategy to function, and can even enable some funky synchro plays by converting an Adamancipator tutor into a level 3 to access the powerful level 6 synchros by using your Gorgonic monsters. In fact, it's pretty fair to say that if you're building any kind of hybrid strategy involving Gorgonics, Cerberus is going to be part of the glue that holds your deck together by acting as a bridge between your archetypes. And while you've never seen the card used competitively, it's easy to see where the applications may lie, whether that's by converting the level of a Chronomaly extender down to 3, or in a blind second variant where, after committing a Nibiru to the field on your opponent's turn, you can then use that Nibiru on your own turn to enable your Gorgonic Guardian with Cerberus and immediately out your opponent's token no matter how high its attack is. Even within its own archetype where most monsters are natively level 3, this effect can still be useful, namely when interacting with Gorgonic Ghoul, which happens to be a level 1 monster, making Cerberus downright necessary for the card to be a functional part of the archetype. For all of its potential uses, Gorgonic Cerberus just doesn't do enough to make itself worthwhile. It's quite nice that you can pair Gorgonic Cerberus with just about any rock monster that can special summon itself out for free and result in a Gorgonic Guardian. But no matter what, for this effect to go off, you have to spend your normal summon on it. And there is a mountain of better rock monsters that you'd rather spend that precious resource on. For example, in Adamancipator strategies, you could normal summon Cerberus to access Gorgonic Guardian after committing some rock monsters to the field, but it's more reliable and far more profitable for you to spend that normal summon on the likes of Analyzer or Doki Doki, both of which can either get your main play started in some way, or can help you extend even further beyond to reach some strong payoffs if you've already managed to build up monsters on field. Likewise, in decks like Magnet Warrior, Fossil Fusion, and Chronomaly, there's no reason to try and prioritize Cerberus above their archetypal normal summons, as they already have their own rewards and game plans that they're shooting for. And Cerberus, while capable of enabling Gorgonic Guardian, doesn't really do anything to give these strategies a real competitive edge. Even within its own archetype, it's really just going to be an okay card at best. It works fine enough because of the way it can interact with generic extenders, and pairs excellently with Gargoyle too, as in both circumstances you'll end up with Gorgonic Guardian on field. But that's just about the depth of play that Cerberus opens up. And for the most part, you'd honestly rather pair Gargoyle with any other level 3 normal summon that could actually get you some real advantage. But if you're playing Gorgonic Ghoul, you might just be forced to play Cerberus anyway. You see, Gorgonic Ghoul is a very particular part of the archetype, as unlike any other monster which is level 3 in order to facilitate the summon of Gorgonic Guardian, Gorgonic Ghoul is a level 1 monster, and has an effect that allows it to special summon itself out from your hand up to twice per turn, so long as you pay 300 life points and control another copy of Gorgonic Ghoul. This effect, as well as its strange level, makes Ghoul one of the most painful and useless cards in the entire strategy. Don't get it twisted, it has its perks. If you can commit a Ghoul to the field and have 2 other in hand, you have the ability to spam the board with a bunch of free materials, and its existence at this level opens up the entire rank 1 pool for the strategy. But trying to do either of these things is just a huge hassle, and requires that you jump through an absurd number of hoops for what is, quite frankly, a mediocre payoff. If you've drawn into a copy of Ghoul, you need to have some way of getting another copy of the card to your field, and unfortunately, that's actually quite difficult to do in a deck like Gorgonic. The best options you have are randomly hitting a Ghoul from an Adamancipator monster effect, or drawing into your 1-of copy of 1-for-1, so that you can use Ghoul as an actual extender, because without them, a drawn Ghoul is doing nothing, unless you happen to have found a 2nd or 3rd copy of it, and are willing to expend your normal summon so you can bring out the rest from your hand. But if you're willing to compromise your normal summon for such a play, then you won't have access to Cerberus's effect to modulate their levels, forcing you to accept that you won't be able to make Gorgonic Guardian this turn, while pushing you to rely on your rank 1 or link options, and while there are some great ones to fall back on, none of them do too much to aid the archetype. Now, usually in such cases where you're looking into a deck that featured in the anime, and a card as counterintuitive as Gorgonic Ghoul appears, it's a good idea to actually go back and watch some of the duels in which the card was featured, because for as simple as anime duels can be, they can at least give you some semblance of an idea behind how to use the card to your advantage. But even Vectors struggle to make Ghoul seem like a real threat. His game plan with the card happened to involve drawing into 3 copies of it, alongside breaking the norm to bring out Shark Mermaid Shark from his deck, and then passing the turn after setting Gorgonic Temptation and Disaster Conspiracy. The strategy hoped that Shark would attack with Gorgonic Temptation guaranteeing that Shark's target would be Mermaid Shark so that Vector could use Disaster Conspiracy to destroy every monster in Shark's deck, effectively floodgating him out of the game since he had no monsters to stage a counterattack. And it was only after Shark passed his turn that Vector was able to normal summon Gorgonic Cerberus to convert his field into 2 Gorgonic Guardians. And while that's quite an impressive payoff, viewers that have been counting might have realized this setup is a 7-card combo that requires 2 turns to function. But the cherry on top of all of this, and by far the funniest part, is that even after all of this setup to make Ghoul a genuine threat, Vector still lost, as he was incapable of finding lethal, and Shark managed to perform an impressive comeback by utilizing the graveyard effect of Gazer Shark, effectively reducing this duel to an advertisement that pleads with you to never try forcing Gorgonics to work, especially not Gorgonic Ghoul. But if you're ever forced into a shadow game and your only option is to play Gorgonic, then you might be interested in Gorgonic Golem. Golem is yet another peculiar card within the strategy, but makes itself a black sheep compared to Gargoyle, Cerberus, and Ghoul because its effects don't do much of anything to actually help you summon out Gorgonic Guardian. Instead, its effects seem to benefit you more if you already have the ability to commit one to the field already. You see, with Golem's first effect, whenever it's destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can reduce the attack of a monster that destroyed it to 0 permanently. Meanwhile, its second effect activates in the grave and lets you banish it for cost to target a set back row your opponent controls to prevent it from being activated this turn, and your opponent can't even activate the back row you target in response to Golem's activation. Now, Golem's first effect definitely isn't amazing. It can come up in certain circumstances when trying to chew through an opponent's board by crashing it so that you can use Gorgonic Guardian's removal effect, or provide you with an opening to beat over an opponent's boss monster that you would otherwise struggle to deal with due to the low attack of all your Gorgonics. But for the most part, this aspect of Golem is a relic of the time long past where you could set a card, pass the turn, and rely on your opponent beating over it and falling for your trap. But even back when Golem was first released, this style of gameplay was already ancient and insufficient. Instead, the most interesting part about Golem is actually its graveyard effect, which despite not doing anything to aid you in bringing out Guardian, actually makes Golem the best normal summon the deck has available to it. By no means is this effect revolutionary. It does nothing on the first turn, and even in instances where it could come up, it only stops a 1 back row from being activated and only for a single turn. But this is far more than what other Gorgonic monsters can offer you. This makes Golem the Gorgonic you always want to pair with Gargoyle. There are definitely better options that exist outside the archetype, but in terms of pure Gorgonic, your only other options are Cerberus, whose effects might as well make it a vanilla, a second copy of Gargoyle, or a monster that doesn't even have the right level to overlay into Guardian. So having this little extra bonus is actually quite nice, because even though you might not be able to use Golem's graveyard effect right away, it can easily be detached from Guardian for its effect to put a stop to your opponent's best plays, and sleeping in the grave ready to deal with whatever back row your opponent set, potentially putting a stop to their last available counterattack before your victory is set in stone. And this is a great little bonus for just doing what the deck wants to do anyways. But the real cool part about this effect is that, while its effect is pretty specific, it doesn't need any setup for it to activate. This is interesting because it means that Golem could be experimented with in just about any strategy that's trying to make use of Miracle Rupture as a way to stop your opponent's back row. And while Tackle Crusader is already another great option to send with Rupture to put a stop to your opponent's spells and traps, its biggest weakness is that it can only ever target face-up back row, while Golem lends itself to its own niche by being able to deal with face-down back row, thereby making Miracle Rupture far more versatile of an option. In any other deck, Golem might have been a card that's easy to ignore due to its pretty lackluster effects. But because of how few members there are within the archetype, as well as how mediocre half the main deck monsters are, Golem is a standout card of the deck. That, while second to Gargoyle, comes with its own unique utility that might inspire you to try it out even outside of dedicated Gorgonic builds. But no matter how you look at it, only one Gorgonic monster is genuinely worth its weight in gold: Gorgonic Guardian. In order to make Guardian, you need to build the overlay network by using 2 level 3 rock type monsters, and if you do, you're rewarded with a stellar boss monster. Guardian's first effect allows you to detach a material at quick effect speed so that you can target one monster opponent controls and reduce its attack to 0. This is already solid enough, but what makes Guardian's stare so chilling is that after reducing their attack, it will then negate that monster's effect until the end of the turn. And that's not all, because its effect directly feeds into Guardian's other effect, which simply lets you target a monster on the field with 0 attack and destroy it. Both of Guardian's abilities are frankly amazing, especially for the time period where Guardian first released, as it's essentially just an infinite impermanent on legs, or rather tail, that you can use during your opponent's turn to interrupt their best plays, all while making the monsters you target entirely toothless, allowing Guardian to have dual use as both a tool for negation and a battle trick. But not only can you use it as a way to interrupt your opponent, Guardian is also an incredible option during your own turn to help chisel into a potential crack with your opponent's field. With its first effect, you can target one's monster with potential dangerous effect, neutralize it with Guardian's Glare, and then use the second effect to remove it from the field completely. No matter how it's used, Gorgonic Guardian is a genuinely stellar card. So much so that it might even trick you into thinking that playing the main deck Gorgonic monster is even worth it whenever you use this effect to put a stop to your opponent's turn. Although as strong as it is, Guardian has never really seen the heights of competitive play that you'd expect from such a solid piece of interaction. At least not in the TCG, as it has a couple of downsides that are really holding it back. Some of them aren't that consequential. For example, Guardian is incapable of negating a monster that already has 0 attack, since their attack needs to be reduced to 0 for its effect to apply. Likewise, its tiny attack stat can make it an astonishingly easy target to beat over, and can force you to activate Guardian's effect prematurely if your opponent is smart about using their battle phase. However, the main reason why Guardian has never really managed to find a home in competitive strategies is because you can only summon it using level 3 rock monsters. Of course, there are a lot of rock-focused strategies in the modern era that range from solid to brilliant. We've seen what Adamantipator can do if given the chance, Megalith messed with the rules of what ritual decks needed to be, and Gem Knights have even been a feared FTK strategy. But in every contemporary competitively viable rock strategy, it's actually pretty hard to try and force a Gorgonic Guardian onto your end board, since most rock decks don't specialize in level 3 monsters, which leaves Guardian with an extremely limited pool of strategies that are capable of even using it. There are definitely some good decks out there that can natively take advantage of Guardian. We've seen how good the likes of Magnet Warrior can be in Duel Links, and Guardian was an amazing buff for this strategy, as it served as incredible interaction removal that you could easily make with your level 3 electromagnets. Likewise, in a deck like Triamid and even Giant Soldier of Stone, having Guardian as a guaranteed payoff can give these strategies a real competitive edge, especially in a format where negation isn't really that common. If Guardian were more generic, it'd be an absurd Xyz monster, and one that just about any deck that could make rank 3s would likely have played. But because it needs a rock monster specifically for its summon, it's unfortunately a card that's been left to gather dust while we wait for the right strategy to take advantage of it. But now that we've thoroughly examined every card in the archetype and have done our best to understand what they were going for, is it right to say that Gorgonic is truly a failure of an archetype? Absolutely. In terms of the main deck monsters, there are some solid standouts that could one day even find their way into another, better rock deck. But if you're trying to tumble these stones into a smooth strategy, you're only going to be met with jagged plays and rocky lines, with half of the archetype being composed of monsters that do almost nothing, or even worse, lack any kind of synergy within the archetype that they're part of. The deck has a great payoff, but trying to reach the reward consistently is strangely a struggle, and trying to do anything beyond that is a Sisyphean task, one in which it's impossible to imagine him happy. And that's upsetting, because for as small as the archetype is, it has some interesting ideas at play. For example, the anime presented Gorgonic as a strategy that was capable of swarming the field and modulating their levels, a strategy that Vector used to change the levels of ghouls to get their multiple Gorgonic Guardians on field, while Abyss used the strength of the Gorgonic back row to modulate their levels into summoning number 73 Abyss Splash. And if this line of thought was committed to a little bit more, the Gorgonics might have been an interesting XC strategy capable of dipping its toes into multiple different ranks, allowing it to traverse almost the entire Xyz pool. Or alternatively, if you're more of the idea of a rank 3 focused strategy, then having some extra ways to extend past the normal summon beyond Gargoyle would be a big help, whether that's because of better monsters being released, or some solid spell and trap cards that make summoning Guardian a genuine breeze. Neither of these ideas would necessarily push Gorgonic into viability, but either would be a start, and would give the deck far more of a fighting chance. Guardian is a great endboard piece. The deck just needs ways of getting to it easier, and doing a little more beyond that. But as it stands right now, Gorgonic is an archetype that's remained stuck in the year 2014 ever since it was released. And now that we've seen long past the deck's 10-year anniversary without any good support, it seems like these snakes are never going to slither their way into the metagame. Alright, and that's the video. If you can think of any other ways to fix the deck, or know of any other cards or mechanics that failed, please let us know down in the comments below.